Cowboys Nation, if you really love this game, this is the time of year where the truth starts to separate itself from the noise. This is when the cameras are on, the stopwatches are out, and reputations either get confirmed or exposed. And when you look at what just happened at the NFL Combine, especially through the lens of the Dallas Cowboys, you start to see exactly why some prospects are rising and why others are quietly slipping downboards. There's a difference between looking the part and being built for it. You can see it on tape. You can feel it when a player understands angles, spacing, leverage, timing. Some guys are just out there trying to survive the moment. Others are wired for it. And when you watch certain prospects over and over, then you see them show up at the Combine and confirm what you already believed. That is when you know the evaluation was real. Take C.J. Allen, for example. What stands out is not just the measurable traits. It is how he processes. He understands the position. You see him directing traffic, getting teammates lined up, communicating adjustments before the snap. Then the national conversation starts catching up. Suddenly people are pointing out the same things that were obvious on film. That is when you know a player is more than just athletic upside. He is a gamer. For a defense like Dallas that values intelligence at the second level, that matters. Then you look at Dylan Lamont. If you watched his tape carefully, you saw a defender who could trigger from depth and close space in a hurry. There are clips where he's 20 yards off the ball and still arrives in time to shut down perimeter action. That is not an accident. That is range translating from testing numbers to football speed. When he showed up and tested the way he did, it should not have surprised anyone who did the homework. The kind of burst at that size makes defensive coordinators start thinking creatively. And that brings us to something bigger. The Combine is not just about raw times. It is about confirmation. It is about answering questions. Jacob Rodriguez came in with some doubts surrounding certain aspects of his game, and he quietly checked important boxes. Caleb Banks walked in with intriguing tape. But once you see a defender of that size move the way he does, you start picturing how he could fit into a defensive front that wants to dominate physically. Think about the blueprint of defensive lines that have controlled the league recently. Massive interior presence, players who collapse pockets and make life easier for edge rushers. Banks has that kind of frame and movement ability that forces you to reimagine your front. When a player is 6'6", well over 300 pounds, and still flashes explosion, that is not common. That is a potential tone setter. Chris Johnson out of San Diego State was another name that forced people to recalibrate. There were questions about athletic ceiling. Then he shows up, runs fast, jumps well, and looks fluid in drills. Suddenly the conversation changes from, is he athletic enough, to how high can he go? That is what this week does. It shifts narratives. But here is the part that has to be said. The biggest losers at the Combine are not always the guys who test poorly. It is the ones who do not test at all. There used to be pride in competing on that stage. It used to be understood that you show up, you line up next to your peers, and you prove in the same environment. Same turf, same pressure, same spotlight. When top prospects choose not to participate, it changes the dynamic. Fans want to see competition. This sport is built on it. When a running back like Jeremiah Love, already considered at the top of his class, still chooses to run and post elite numbers, that sends a message. He did not need to. He wanted to. That competitive edge tells you something about the wiring. Teams notice that. Coaches notice that. That mentality translates. Now, from the Cowboys' perspective, this is where it gets interesting. Draft boards are not built in isolation. They're shaped by what the rest of the league needs. If a tight end like Kenyon Sadek tests through the roof, that can push him into a range where a team like Kansas City, always looking to add dynamic pieces, might pull the trigger earlier than expected. That ripple effect matters. Sonny Styles is another fascinating case. When you combine size, versatility, and athletic testing, you create a profile that defensive coordinators fall in love with. Even if some teams historically hesitate to take off-ball linebackers high, a rare athlete can break trends. And if multiple teams start viewing him as a hybrid chess piece rather than a traditional linebacker, his value spikes. For Dallas, sitting at 12, the board could look very different depending on how many offensive tackles and receivers come off early. There's always a premium on protecting quarterbacks. Players like Will Campbell are going to be discussed heavily in the top tier because franchise tackles are hard to find. If a run on linemen happens early, it could push defensive talent down to the Cowboys' range. And then there is the nickel position, which has quietly become one of the most important roles in modern defenses. Listen to how coaches talk about it. They want someone who can cover slot receivers, match up with athletic tight ends, blitz effectively, and tackle like a linebacker. That is not a specialist. That is a complete football player. In a division where offenses spread you out and force mismatches, the nickel is not a luxury. It is foundational. If Dallas does not feel completely secure there, it becomes a serious draft conversation. You start evaluating whether someone like Dylan Lamon could handle that hybrid responsibility. You look at whether C.J. Allen's instincts translate into sub-package flexibility. You even explore names flying under the radar who might thrive with the right coaching. This is why the combine matters beyond the headlines. It sharpens the picture. It exposes who embraced the moment and who avoided it. It forces teams to weigh tape against testing and character against comfort. And for the Cowboys, every performance in Indianapolis has a ripple effect on what that 12th pick might ultimately look like as the board begins to take shape. When you start projecting this thing forward, you realize the Cowboys are sitting in a fascinating spot because the board in front of them could break in multiple directions. That is what makes this draft cycle so compelling. It is not just about who Dallas likes. It is about who the rest of the league forces into their lap. And when we talk about momentum after the combine, we are really talking about pressure. Pressure on general managers to react. Pressure on coaching staffs to pound the table for their guy. Pressure created by testing numbers that shift perception overnight. Look at a player like Kenyon Sadek. When a tight end runs in the 4.3s and jumps through the roof, that does not just boost his stock. It changes how teams view their offensive ceiling. Suddenly, coordinators are imagining vertical stress on defenses, mismatched nightmares against linebackers, and red zone packages built around pure athletic dominance. A franchise with an established quarterback and playoff aspirations might decide that type of weapon is worth jumping earlier than expected. And if that happens, someone at another position slides. Sonny Styles is another example of how testing can amplify versatility. When you combine size, speed, and physicality, evaluators start talking about a defender who can align in multiple spots without tipping the coverage. In today's league, disguise is everything. Offenses are too advanced, quarterbacks process too quickly. If you can present the same pre-snap look and rotate into different responsibilities post-snap, you gain an advantage. That is where a hybrid defender becomes incredibly valuable. And if multiple teams convince themselves he is not just an off-ball linebacker, but a true defensive chess piece, he becomes a top-tier asset. Now bring that back to Dallas. The Cowboys have to ask themselves a hard question. Are they drafting strictly for need, or are they drafting for impact? Because sometimes those two things do not line up perfectly. The nickel role, for example, is not flashy in terms of draft headlines, but within the structure of modern defenses, it is critical. Against teams that live in 3-receiver sets, that player is effectively a starter. He has to tackle in space, fit the run like a linebacker, carry vertical routes from the slot, and blitz with timing. That is not a limited skill set. If Christian Parker envisions a defense built on multiplicity, then the nickel spot becomes a priority. You cannot hide a weakness there. Offensive coordinators will hunt it every Sunday. They will motion into it, isolate it, and force it into space. So when you evaluate prospects who have the fluidity to mirror receivers and the toughness to step into the box, that evaluation carries weight. Dylan Lamon fits part of that conversation because of his range and willingness to trigger downhill. On film, you see him close ground in a hurry, and that matters when you're defending jet motion and perimeter screens. But the key question becomes consistency in coverage technique. Can he mirror quick slot receivers over a full game? Can he handle the mental load of adjusting to route combinations on the fly? Those answers determine whether he is a rotational piece or a foundational one. C.J. Allen, meanwhile, offers something slightly different. His value is rooted in anticipation and command. When a defender consistently puts himself in the right position before the ball arrives, that is not accidental. That is film study and instinct. In a sub-package heavy defense, that kind of awareness helps mask physical limitations. It allows you to play faster because you're rarely guessing. Then there is the reality of the board beyond 12. Teams drafting in the top 10 often cannot afford to simply take the best player available. They're usually there for a reason. Roster holes, coaching transitions, quarterback instability. That creates urgency. A franchise desperate for edge pressure might bypass a luxury pick at running back, even if the talent is obvious. A team rebuilding its offensive line might prioritize protection over playmaking. Those decisions create ripple effects. If a run on offensive tackles happens early, that could benefit Dallas. Franchise tackles are gold in this league. Prospects like Will Campbell are going to dominate discussions because protecting a quarterback is non-negotiable. When teams start reaching slightly to secure that position, defensive prospect can slide. And if a dynamic defender unexpectedly falls into range, the Cowboys have to be ready to pivot. At the same time, wide receiver depth in this class could influence things. If teams view Carnell Tate as a top option after his strong athletic showing, that might push him into the top tier. And once the first few receivers go, others follow. It is a domino effect. Suddenly a defensive back projected 11 is there at 12 because 3 skill position players went in a row. But let us circle back to competition because that piece matters more than people admit. When prospects skip testing, they are betting on tape alone. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it creates doubt. Front offices are filled with decision makers who value competitiveness. When a player embraces the moment, even with nothing to gain, it reinforces belief in his makeup. That is not something you measure with a stopwatch, but it is real. For Dallas, culture has to be part of the equation. Talent wins games, but mentality sustains success. If you're building a defense that needs to respond to high-powered offenses in your conference, you want competitors. You want players who run toward the spotlight, not away from it. The combine becomes one data point in that evaluation. And as we move closer to draft night, the conversation is going to intensify around who truly fits what this team is trying to become. Is the priority overwhelming the line of scrimmage with size and strength? Is it adding speed and versatility to counter spread attacks? Is it investing in a premium offensive tackle to solidify protection for the long haul? Every combine result adds fuel to those debates. What makes this moment so intriguing for the Cowboys is that they are not rebuilding. They are recalibrating. That means the margin for error is thinner. A miss at 12 is not just a developmental setback. It is a missed opportunity to elevate a roster that believes it can contend. And when you evaluate how the board could shift because of explosive testing from players like Kenyon Sadek or Sonny Styles, you start to understand how fragile projections really are. All it takes is one surprise pick ahead of you to change the entire landscape. One team falling in love with upside. One general manager reacting to elite measurables. One coaching staff pushing for scheme fit over consensus ranking. And suddenly the Cowboys are on the clock with a different set of options than anyone predicted just weeks earlier, which is why every 40 time, every vertical jump, every drill rep in Indianapolis echoes all the way to draft night and forces Dallas to keep recalculating their path forward as the board continues to evolve. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Dallas Cowboys. Feel free to share your thoughts on the news in the comments as well. What started as quiet chatter inside league circles is quickly growing into a full-blown talking point around the NFL, the Brandon Aubrey situation in Dallas. Sources close to the organization suggest the Dallas Cowboys may have moved faster than expected to secure their breakout kicker, locking him in before uncertainty could turn into a distraction. The word around the league is that Dallas had little appetite for letting this linger. Aubrey's rapid rise has not gone unnoticed, and teams are always on the lookout for consistency at a position that can quietly decide seasons. While kickers rarely dominate headlines, executives know how fragile stability can be when it comes to the final points on the scoreboard. The Cowboys, it seems, preferred prevention over panic. Insiders describe the move as both strategic and symbolic. Strategically, it removes a potential pressure point that could have escalated into a negotiation saga. Symbolically, it sends a message that performance will be rewarded, regardless of position. In a league where star contracts often overshadow special teams, Dallas appears intent on showing that reliability matters just as much as flash. There's also a sense that timing was everything. Allowing AUBREY's name to drift toward future speculation could have invited unnecessary noise, both internally and externally. By acting decisively, the Cowboys may have insulated their locker room from questions that distract from preparation and focus. For a franchise constantly under the national microscope, minimizing drama can be as valuable as adding talent. Around the NFL, some see this as a quiet warning shot. Locking down one of the league's most dependable legs could force other teams to reassess how they value their own specialists. Others believe it reflects a broader organizational mindset shift in Dallas, one that prioritizes continuity and control over reactive decision-making. Whether this move proves to be merely prudent or quietly pivotal remains to be seen. But one thing is clear in league whispers. The Cowboys weren't willing to gamble on uncertainty when certainty was already standing on their sideline. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Dallas Cowboys, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We always look forward to your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.